Hello, my name is Owen Hickerson, and welcome to my TED Talk. For my TED Talk, for my thesis, I chose to look at what actions in the history of European empires may be observed to predict the United States of America's downfall. And I found that the collapse of empires is fundamentally due to economics, which may be expressed through militaristic, political, or religious breakdowns. And what really makes an empire is solely an idea. It is meant to show the power and influence that that nation has over others, whether that is through surrounding areas or distant areas. And the United States of America in the modern day is an empire because we push our own ideals and our own power over many other states throughout the world. So the first empire that I looked at was the Ottoman Empire. And I chose the Ottoman Empire because they were very similar to us in their time. They were very strong economically due to their interjection of the trade routes throughout Europe and Asia. And with this, they found great economic success and funded their military so that they were powerful enough to continue to push, and eventually they managed to conquer all of this area. And because of this, or led by Sultanate, wow, I'm spacing on the name, Suleiman the Magnificent, he raised the army known as the Cole, and the Cole was extremely strong because it went into other nations and would hide itself among the general population and then conquer through when the Ottoman armies came to invade. Following Sultanate, Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottoman Empire became stuck in their success. They slowly over time lost land and lost economic funding and lost their economic success that they had found in the early years. And eventually, by 1914, they had shrunk by over half of their land. Then, in 1914, Dr. Nazim Bey overthrew the current Sultanate, Beznid VI, and with this they joined World War I and allied with the Central Powers. However, due to their economic insuccess, they were not funded well enough in order to truly be a part of the war. And after the realization of their inability to be a part of the war and their attack on Russia, Dr. Nazim Bey was cast out of leadership, and Enver Pasha, who was the current general of the Ottoman armies, took command over defense. And the Ottoman Empire really fell because of this economic insuccess and their inability to change as time did. And because of this, their military remained strong, and they kept funding going towards their military to maintain this idea of them being big and a world power still. And eventually, when they went to war, they did not have the funds to defend themselves, and when they lost, the surrounding areas were divided between Britain and France. The next empire that I looked at was the Russian Empire. And the Russian Empire also relates to our political system that we have today. In the early 1900s, they were led by the Tsar, and the Tsar was a ruthless group of rulers. They had no care for their citizens and would drain money from their citizens to make sure that the rich were rich. However, as is human nature, the people began to rise up, and they overthrew Nicholas II and executed the Romanov family, therefore beginning the USSR under the care of Vladimir Lenin, who suggested communism. However, civil war broke out because not everyone agreed with this communistic idea. And during this time, they were still an empire. When World War II started and Vladimir Lenin died, Joseph Stalin took power and sent Russia into a dictatorship, and therefore reverting it back to its position underneath the Tsar, a leader who does not care much for his people and rather would prefer money over their country's success. Eventually, as time changes and the people began to realize what was happening, and the Cold War was also at this time happening, The people and the government eventually needed to change, and they elected their first president, Boris Yeltsin. This was the official end of the Russian Empire in 1980, and they fell due to their constant political change, their poverty towards their citizens, and their inability to assist their citizens in basic needs. Applying all this to the modern day America, it is noticeable that with our economics, which you can't read at the bottom, our trade is we import much more than we export, which means that we are spending much more money than we are gaining. And because of this, under our glorious leader Donald Trump, we are losing resources, and our current debt is over $22.1 trillion and raising rapidly. And our leader claims that this is creating more jobs and a better economic market. However, America's government is still in debt, and while our citizens may be rich, the 1% controls almost 40% of all money in the United States. Also, and our poverty rates are much higher than they should be. In a rich society, theoretically, you should be able to have the most minuscule poverty rate possible. However, we stay around 12 to 15% constantly. And with this, our citizens are not able to live normal lives and be able to invest in the average house. Also, looking at our economic spendings, we put much more money towards our military than anything else, which is directly relatable to Ottoman. Ottoman paid most of its money to its military to maintain that large sense and that world power. We see ourselves as the world police, and although we may be assisting other countries, it's not entirely necessary for us to be in those countries. Which moves us into military. We have the highest percentage of military deployment out of any country in the world. And we have been constantly deployed in nations since World War II, which is incredibly unhealthy, and if military spending was perhaps cut so that other areas of economic growth were possible, we may be able to evolve so that our debt is not nearly as much. Our debt is not raising as rapidly as it currently is. So, with American politics today, we have this very much so versus mentality. We create arguments and separate ourselves from one another, and in turn, we may divide ourselves to one side or the other and have no in between. And this chart on the right shows how truly different our ideas are, and this also shows how different the ideals of the main parties are. And this is comparable to Russia. Russia was very divided, and its people didn't know what political system they wanted, and that led to civil war. And whoever controlled the money in Russia controlled power over it, and that is very true for the American society as well. So America's downfall is truly due to our imperialistic ideas. It is even statable in the American dream that belief that other nations should replicate America's development. That is incredibly imperialistic and pushes the idea that we are better than other nations and that they should follow suit with what we have done. We are a very greedy society, and the 1% wants to make more money while perhaps the poor are incapable of making more. And this is directly relatable to Russia. The Russian rich got richer while the poor became poorer, and there was no middle class. In modern day America, our middle class is disappearing rapidly. Our government is in debt. The Ottoman Empire's government was incredibly in debt as well because of their military spendings and their inability to trade from that trade economic growth. We may have a rich economy, however, so was Ottoman during its time. When Ottoman was in power, the citizens were incredibly rich due to the spice trade that was constantly leaving and entering Europe and Asia. And however, times change and our rich economy may collapse. Our poverty rates are also much higher than they should be for this rich of a society. And that's directly relatable to Russia. Russia had an extremely high poverty rate and saw its citizens as more exploitable than true citizens of the same nation as them. So, to really see if America will fall, I looked at the indications that the other nations gave, and I directly correlated that to America's current state. And seeing where Russia was when it began to fall, and seeing where Ottoman was when it began to fall, I would say that America either has 100 to 150 years, whether that's our slow decline over those 100 to 150 years, or stepping stones down into a broken economic market. However, undoubtedly, it is unknown, and it cannot be dictated when and how the American empire will fall. And because of this, we can either choose to change to make it greater, or choose to remain the same and eventually cause our own fall. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Owen. So we are going to move into the question and answer portion. So audience over here, feel free to ask questions, and then panelists, you as well. Okay. Yep.
How far off was I?
Just a couple minutes.
Okay.
I got a question.
Yes.
So, the fall of the Ottoman Empire was military,
Military and economics.
and the fall of the Russian Empire, the Soviet Empire, was coup.
Was political and economics.
Change politically. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you see the American Empire falling?
I would see the American Empire applying all of these things. We currently have people that disagree with the people that are in power, and we have people that agree with the people that are in power. And because of this, we have the separated mentality that comes with political imbalances, and we also have a very strong economic market, just like Ottoman, and eventually Ottoman's market collapsed when their economic success was no longer viable in that time.
So do you see a breakup of the United States then into
I
multiple entities, kind of like the Ottoman Empire did?
Yes.
Like a fragmentation into...
So you talked about how we can choose to change so that our American empire does not collapse. What would that look like?
Perhaps making it livable for any normal citizen, somebody that works a normal end job, is capable of still living in the American society. I have no direct way or options that could directly change it, because the thing about politics and economics is that once they are set, they're very hard to change. And I think that if America chose to change our economics and focused more on gaining money rather than exporting it, and more so for the government than really our economic market, is really finding that balance of like making sure that we have a good education for everyone, making sure that everybody can live a healthy life within the American society and not have to worry about becoming homeless or being being much lower in the lower class than it should.
Can I ask a follow-up there?
Yes.
So what you're talking about seems to me like the increase of like economic inequality and sort of polarization of wealth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is what you're talking about in the U.S. Did they see that in the Ottoman Empire and the USSR before they fell? Like, did they see that sort of extreme inequality grow?
Well, so Russia kind of maintained its constant inequality and never really had a middle class. It was either you were rich or you were poor.
So that just didn't change for them.
Prior to the revolution?
Well, for the Tsar especially, there was much more poor and then rich. And then when the USSR was established, they tried to balance it more so that there was more of a middle class. However, eventually they lost all their proceeds and just became pretty much all lower class.
The American identity is like really strong with all of us, like American drink or whatever. I don't really see like economics being the main downfall of us turning against each other. In your research, you found like anything contradicting to that? Like Ottomans all had like a central idea, and then once the economy fell, people just turned on each other.
The Ottoman people were incredibly religious and incredibly loyal to their country. They saw their country as great because of Suleiman the Magnificent, and they saw that with their economic success they were powerful, and with that they as the economic market crashed, they maintained that religious aspect, and many of them, since they were a Jewish people, did not go to Jerusalem. They chose to stay in Ottoman because they saw that as their land, and they were very indebted to that land.
Alright, so is there a reason why you chose to group? Alright, so you focused on the Ottoman Empire, which is one specific state, but then you focused on the Tsarist Russia, then the USSR, and then you transitioned into the Russian Republic. Is there a reason you put them all together? Did you see, for example, each three of these states as just continuations of the last one?
Yes, especially from Tsarist to the USSR, although things did change in 1918, they did not truly change following Vladimir Lenin. And because of that, all three of the states can be observed as a constant empire, and then their fall due to the political changes that were implemented.
This is more of a question of how you're framing things. And are you considering the fall of an empire it no longer being considered an empire, or complete societal collapse?
So the fall of an empire, like I said at the beginning, an empire is an idea of the state of that country. And when Russia stopped being the USSR and became the Russian Republic, they stopped having the ability to push their power over others, because they knew that if they did, other nations such as America, because America is very, the opposite of Russia, we would see their pushing of power over others as a threat to us, and because of that they would most likely collapse again.
What about Ukraine?
I don't know about Ukraine. With Ukraine, it's kind of a separation from Russia, and
Well, I mean, just like the fact that in the way that you classify the U.S. as an imperial force putting our influence forcefully in other countries, isn't Russia doing the same in Ukraine? So couldn't they also be considered an empire again?
they
just
are
with
I
a
suppose-
different title.
I suppose they are. However, I would consider the beginning of the Russian Republic the true end of the Russian Empire, because especially for the time, they, with like the introduction of quick communication and the speed at which other nations respond to action, they most likely would be unable to conquer much following Ukraine.
So you talk about the economic downturn of the Ottoman Empire. I would like to know, like, what didn't change that should have, like, what did they fail to adapt to?
So when their economic market was really strong, they were extremely good at spice trade, and they had trade routes that ran through their country, and if other nations wanted to go around, they would have to go through Russia, which at the time was not very good, because Russia was a strong empire, and if you passed through their lands, they would steal your spice trade. And because of that, they chose to go through Ottoman instead and take the tax. However, as times change, so does trade routes. Were made easier, and they could go around the Ottoman Empire and no longer have that tax, therefore making the Ottoman Empire fairly null in the spice trade. And as their economic market collapsed, they still saw themselves as the best spice traders in that area of the world. And they continued to try and make money from spice trade, but because they couldn't tax heavily for traders that were passing through the Ottoman Empire, they were semi-forced into a failing of their own economics.
Thank you very much, Owen. Let's give him a round of applause. I'm going to send you out. I'm gonna call you back in.